So here today to talk about how online use affects a child's identity is a youth culture specialist from Youth Unlimited in Toronto, Paul Robertson. Well, welcome, Paul. Thank you for being on the show today.
Great to see you, Bill.
Yeah. Well, now, okay, you have spent years studying the effects of cyberspace on young people. So let me ask you, why is it important to you personally, and why do you help teach others about this topic?
Well, I think there's three things that drive my passion these days, and I've been at this a long time. The first is this whole generation of young people, I think, are being significantly manipulated by the tech industry. And I think that's a dangerous thing, and I don't really think that it's fair to our kids as well. My second thing is there's a lot of parents who have no idea what's going on out there. They don't have a clue about how cyberspace works, how it affects their kids, how it's stealing their identities and all the negative impacts. And part of that is because there's so many parents today that are just preoccupied with their screens as well. And thirdly, I'm not sure how well the church is dealing with all of this. For the last 4 or 5 years, I focused on trying to help churches, Christian schools, whoever, better understand how our kids get addicted and what's really going on out there and how we can be better responding to the needs of our kids in this high-tech world.
Yeah, and technology has given us opportunities like never before, but there definitely is a dark side or a dangerous side, and we just need to be aware of that. And so that's really, really helpful. But, I've heard this term digital Babylon. So what does that term mean to you, and how is it impacting boys and girls differently, especially in the idea of identity right now?
Digital Babylon was a term phrased by Barna Research out of the States. And it really, Babylon was the real place where God's people were allowed to be sent, and it wasn't a very pleasant place. And today our kids, instead of living their lives in the here and now, are spending them on screens in the digital Babylon. And it really is an accelerated, ever-changing kind of culture that our kids are growing up in. They can go online, they can go to so many different places out there. And once they get there, there's two things. One, it's very alienating because in order to go into cyberspace, you do it most of the time by yourself. And the other dangerous thing is, and you kind of alluded to the dark side, is that there are no rules. There are no boundaries. You're basically free to do whatever you want when you're out there. And so it's a different world. I don't believe it's a world that God ever created us to live in. And it impacts girls differently than boys. Girls, when tech industry talked to psychologists about, what's the most basic drive in the life of a young person, the psychologist's answer was, well, for girls, it's to have relationships, it's to have friendships, it's to be loved, it's not to be alienated from their friends. And the tech industry came up with things called social media, whether it's Facebook or Snapchat or Instagram, whatever it might be, where girls can go. They spend a lot of time posting their selfies and putting these things up in the hopes that people are going to like them. They'll get their thumbs up, their long threads on Snapchat, whatever it might be. But eventually, every young girl realizes that what she's posting out there isn't really her. It's a false self. And think of it this way. This is the only place, the only time in the world when a girl gets rewarded for being someone other than who she is. And I just think that's just a very dangerous thing. And as a result of all that, we have all kinds of girls that are suffering from anxiety and depression and suicide. In fact, I read a stat, and I wrote it down to make sure I get it right, that between 2009 and 2015, so in that 6-year period, just after iPads and iPhones came out, non-fatal hospitalizations for girls ages 15 to 19 in America increased 62%. And in the 10 to 14 age category for girls, it increased 189%. And then you move up one category to suicide. So suicides for girls ages 15 to 19 went up 70% in that 6-year period. And for girls ages 10 to 14, it increased 151%. That's the danger. That's the dark side to all of this. But it happens so quietly, it's like we don't really notice what's going on out there. For boys, it's a little bit different. Boys will do selfie and that kind of stuff, but they treat it totally different. For boys, when the psychologists were asked, what's the most basic drive in the life of a boy, The answer was, accomplishing a sense of competency, achieving things, having control over their environment became very important. And so technology came up with online gaming. And the rest is history, so to speak. How many young people do we have in Canada that are addicted to online video gaming? And that all happens because of the dopamine effect, that every time they get a reward, they get a kick of dopamine, they want to play more, and so forth and so on. And you have boys who will play to the point where they'll have nothing to do with their family. They'll skip school. They'll lock themselves in their room. I can remember talking one time to a father who said his son was playing 6 to 8 hours of online video gaming a day. And the father, he couldn't figure out what was going on and was it their fault? No, it's not your fault. You have a tech industry that has designed these things to be intentionally addictive to our young people. And that's the greatest challenge that we have, is helping our kids get through this stuff.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think the reality is that the online reality or facade and the real life have intermingled so that there's no longer any distinction. And so that can be very scary for a lot of our viewers. And so we have about a minute left. Maybe help us then navigate this. What are some practical steps to navigating this digital Babylon in a healthy way? Is there a way that we could do this?
Well, there's ways that we can do it. And of course, everything begins with prayer and begins with God's help. But let me give you 3 focus that I think parents need to have. And then we'll end with some practical things. Number 1, we need to change the environment that our kids are in. And by that, I mean, we need to get them away from screens. One way to break an addiction is to change the environment. Get them involved in sports teams. Get them outside hiking, walking, doing anything except being in front of a screen. And secondly, we need to focus on their quality character development. Cyberspace doesn't care anything about the character of our kids. And so we need to really, as parents, begin to groom our kids to be people of quality, people of character, because all the time they're spending on the screens is denying that developmental side of them when it comes to that. And lastly, help our kids find out what their gift and talent and passion is and help them develop into that and grow into that. And lastly, and I think you'll have this available, is a handout called 50 Ways to Have a Healthier Relationship with Your Screens, which people can get off of your website or my website.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for a lot of really good and helpful information and some tips. And if you'd like to know more about that, just do go to our website and you can access all of that information there. Thank you, Paul, so much for joining us today. Always great to see you.
Thanks, Bill.